The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome back to Dave and Mickey's Shiny Side Out.
Yes.
Gonna shout it from the rooftops. That's right. If you can donate, please do. This is listener-funded radio, and that means no one else is giving us money. Hurrah! So I know, right? So if you can donate, please do. If you can't, that's cool. I dig it. Of course, times are what they are. But tell people about the station. That helps. It really does. So if you can do that, that would be brilliant. If you like what you're hearing, even better. Maybe why don't you help your friends to see the light, or not, as the case may be. We are talking about the system we have come to believe is the only system that works for us, economically speaking. The ramifications go well beyond the economic, of course. It is the system we live in every day. The banking, the money system, the parasitic system that preys on all of us, turns us all, if we're lucky enough at least, into wage slaves. And there's a difference between how people live in this system. Some thrive, some do not, some survive. And the difference is this. If you're one of the parasites, or if you're very fortunate and you actually made it through hard work, good for you, then you can live. You have choices that many, many, many other people do not. And that's awesome. That's awesome. But we have allowed in our system for the existence of a class that doesn't have to do anything, the parasitic class. You can live on accumulated wealth without ever having lifted a finger in your life. I mean, this is really
making me jealous.
What it boils down to, Dave. You see? Mm-hmm. At some point in the past, we're going to go through the history in detail, we decided that let's have tokens of exchange. Makes life easier, to exchange goods and services. We can travel more. Then as we traveled further, we invented more universal forms of exchange. That's all good. There's not actually, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? It's a really clever way of doing business. It's a really clever way of existing. It's a really clever way of being able to go places as well. It really is. It really is. But if you accumulate enough of these tokens, you no longer have to do anything. And however you accumulate them is really, up to you, I guess. But most people that accumulate a lot, and I mean ridiculous amounts, don't do so in the most ethical or even legal ways, such as it is. And people are now able not to do anything, not to contribute in any meaningful way to anything we do in our civilization, because they've got lots of these tokens, right? Is there like a ping I'm hearing? What is that?
It's my phone.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was wondering if I was being censored.
Every time you say the word,
the great brother in the cloud.
Turn the volume down.
So we have this funny situation where, wealth begets wealth, and these rich people are getting richer and richer, not because they're working hard, but because their money, their tokens are working for them. The power they are able to purchase, the influence they purchase, allows them not to actually do any work. Not to do any work at all, which is really interesting. And more of that money or that spending power, these tokens, is accumulated at the top, which of course will eventually lead to complete collapse of the system. But that's where we are, right? We are in a system now that is sort of kilter with what we should do, that only, I think, the collapse of it would rectify things. And a similar collapse that I guess, we saw in the Fight Club, the book as well as the movie. Very interesting novel. Having said that, it is a system. It's not a bad system, but because it is, corruptible, it was corrupted. And it's the banks, or what is today the banks, that started down the path of this corruption. What do I mean by that? And we'll talk about that in detail in history, but easily, fundamentally, the way we treat these tokens now, right, is as though they were real, and they no longer are. In the olden days, the people that had gold would give it to someone to keep it safe, usually a goldsmith, because they had, these safes. And the goldsmiths would notice, hey, people never really come and ask for the gold. They've got the letter that says they have the gold. So the goldsmiths, the clever ones, would say, you know what, I'm just going to lend this gold out to other people. And that's how banking was born, essentially. And then, we're now at a point where banks don't have to hold any reserves at all anymore in order to lend money. And we also have come to a point where we no longer have a gold standard that backs our currencies such as they are. So there are no fiat currencies, meaning they only have value because the government says it has value. And now it's a small hop, skip, and jump into completely virtual money, where there is nothing. Yeah, I mean, and again, I think you said this last time, Dave. Australia is the country which has the most tap and go adaptation.
Yeah, with the highest adopters of it.
Yeah. Now, funnily enough,
almost completely wiped out cash, and there's only a push to keep it there as long as there are people wanting to use it.
Oh yeah,
and that's very rare now. It's only the elderly.
Yeah. Having said that, I prefer to have cash in my pocket because I've been in situations where the system just collapsed. I couldn't do anything.
That's right.
So it doesn't help me. So I carry.
And not
cash.
even the physical card can do anything because no one has those machines anymore.
There you go. Exactly. Now, interestingly enough, I was born in Germany, and Germans are very funny and peculiar. They don't believe in credit. They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
Germans don't believe in credit cards, to the point where 10 years ago, thereabouts, I was in Germany, and I wanted to pay. This was in Cologne, right? And, so it's not a small town. It's a large city. And I wanted to pay something with my credit card. Couldn't do it. I went to the supermarket, wanted to pay my credit card. Couldn't do it. Bank card, sure. Credit card, no. Can't do it.
So a debit card, sure, but not a credit card.
That is correct.
Yeah,
and they said to me, "Oh well, if you need your credit card, you can go to the airport. There's some shops that'll take your money."
Wow.
Because Germans fundamentally don't spend money they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Funny, right? It's like what? The whole system is collapsing. So, and that's really the German. I think it's a laudable attitude to have. I only spend the money that I have. There's a good idea, right? And it really serves the Germans well. I mean, it's still a very strong economy. I mean, there's flaws and faults, but still, it's pretty good. So it was very different. Whereas here in Australia, you can pay. I could buy a 10-cent chewing gum with my credit card if I really want to. Of course, that's insane because I probably pay more on bank fees than the chewing gum is worth. But I could.
But that's true too.
I know, right? So
the fees would be higher. That's right.
It's insane, but you could if you really wanted to. There you go. But the problem, of course, is that, and I did work on the notes today for 2 hours, and then when I've saved the file, it saved it as 0 bytes. Hurrah! For some reason, my autosave function is off. Whatever. I'm fixing it. I found the sites again, but there's some really interesting thoughts from a few leading economists that I wanted to share with you. But we'll do it in the next show. We'll do the next show notes. But this is where we are. So, Dave, which page?
Page number 29.
How it works, is that it?
That's correct.
Why don't you tell us how it works?
Yes. Okay, so how it works. In most legal systems, a bank deposit is not a bailment. In other words, the funds deposited are no longer the property of the customer. The funds become the property of the bank, and the customer in turn receives an asset called a deposit account or a checking or savings account. The deposit account is a liability of the bank on the bank's books and on its balance sheet. Because the balance is authorized by law to create credit up to an amount equal to a multiple of the amount of its reserves, the bank's reserves on hand to satisfy payment of deposits liabilities amounts to only a fraction of the total amount which the bank is obligated to pay in satisfaction of its demand deposits. Fractional reserve banking ordinarily functions smoothly. Relatively few depositors demand payment at any given time, and banks maintain a buffer of reserves to cover depositors' cash withdrawals and other demands for funds. However, during a bank run or a generalized financial crisis, demands for withdrawal can exceed the bank's funding buffer, and the bank will be forced to raise additional reserves to avoid defaulting on its obligations. A bank can raise funds from additional borrowings, e.g. borrowing in the interbank lending market or from the central bank. By selling assets is another way, or by calling in short-term loans. If creditors are afraid that the bank is running out of reserves or is insolvent, they have an incentive to redeem their deposits as soon as possible before other depositors access the remaining reserves. Thus, the fear of a bank run can actually precipitate the crisis. Think about that. Many of the practices of contemporary bank regulation and central banking, including centralized clearing of payments, central banking lending to member banks, regulatory auditing, and government-administered deposit insurance, are designed to prevent the occurrence of such bank runs.
That's right.
Mickey, there's a very funny scene in The Simpsons where Bart is in a bank intentionally trying to destroy the bank. And he says, in a voice trying to throw his voice to the side, he goes, "I heard they're insolvent. I want my money," right? And he walks around saying these negative comments. And then suddenly everyone has the panic and fear and is solidifying this section that I just read into one quick 10 to 15 second bit in The Simpsons. And suddenly the banks are closing their shutters and not allowing anyone to take any more money out. And that's how quickly a bank run can occur. And one nearly happened the other month here in Australia, where this call to keep cash and the cash transport trucks, which you've seen all over the world, here in Australia are running out of jobs to do. They don't have enough cash to transport around because everyone's using this tap, right? Yeah. So the media, with the help of the government and the banks, put out a statement saying, to keep them employed, why don't you just go and take out $20 out of your account in cash? That'll keep them employed. Suddenly, people were inundating the banks with trying to take money out. And whilst they knew this was coming, there were some banks that had to say, we just don't have enough cash to support this. The call was too big. We nearly caused a bank run. Mm-hmm. Banks had to acknowledge the fact that they didn't have enough cash. And it's only cash on hand. I mean, they're making billions and billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars off a very small 23 million people. And yet they didn't have enough cash on hand to service those requests for money.
It doesn't exist.
It's all fictional.
It is. It is completely fictional. It simply doesn't exist. And because it doesn't exist, you can't have it. So it is really, in many ways, it is hilarious that we live in an economy that exists pretty much entirely on trust and faith. So if you're an atheist, you should feel very queasy right now because our entire monetary system is entirely faith-based. That's all it is.
Hey, is it possible that you could be an economic, or what's the word I'm looking at? Atheist?
Yeah, absolutely.
You could.
In fact, you belong to the school of Austrian economists, if you are, or my school of economic thinking as well, because I don't like to have faith in my currency. I like my currency to be a thing, right? Now, of course,
real.
Yeah, in fact, no, actually, UDF and I, we grew up in a world.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we were born into a world, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
where currencies were based on a gold standard.
That's correct.
That changed very rapidly in the Nixon years, and this was, in fact, when was it? 1971. It was 1971. Let me just double check because I want to tell you something that's wrong. Yes, sorry, 1971. In 1971, so when I was 2 and Dave was 28, we what? Who said that? We moved from a gold standard to a petrodollar standard, if you will, right? And then, of course, now it's fiat currency, and your currency is only worth something because your government says it is. But we'll talk about that in detail as well. And this is really where we are, though. It's really quite disturbing. But a lot of the laws, they're not there to protect you, the depositor, right? You have to understand that. You giving your money to the bank, that's an expectation. Of our economic system. That's an expectation. If nobody deposits their money in banks, we would be living in a very different economic system. But we are, and we do, and that's where we are. So if it comes to these bank runs or other, and in fact in 2008 we saw exactly what happened, right? The people don't matter. The banks matter. We are going to protect the banks. What should happen in a capitalist economy, right? A business that fails should fail. If your business is not competitive enough, the goods aren't good enough, it's too expensive, whatever the case may be, right? Your business will fail, and that's pretty much the end of it. In our economy, which is not capitalism, businesses that fail, especially if they're banks, maybe because they're banks, they're propped up by government money, which really is your money, right? It's tax money. And that's what happened. And that's what's happening still. And this power that these banks have is so encompassing that all laws are there to protect the banks. All the laws. Bank robbery is a federal crime in America. Right? It's a horrible crime. And they put you away for 20, 30 years. Sometimes more than murder. Right? Also, currency, counterfeiting, another crime, put you away for 20 years, 30 years, right? Bank runs can't happen. They will bring out the National Guard to prevent bank runs, or in other countries, the police, etc. Bank runs are not allowed to happen. It's not going to happen, full stop. So they are protected, in case you're wondering. So if it helps you sleep at night to know that these bankers are safe, then I hope I've done my bit to assure you of that. Which brings us to the economic function of fractional reserve banking. It allows banks to create credit in the form of bank deposits, which represent immediate liquidity to depositors. In fact, I will argue that credit creation is the main form of currency or money creation in the economy. That's my argument. What banks give to you is there. And this is the funny thing as well. As a bank issues a loan, a credit, right, to you, it is usually a secured loan. Very, very few times, usually it's a home loan or a car loan or whatever. If it's a personal loan, it's much less value, like $10,000-$20,000. That's okay. It's not too bad, even if you default on it. But all the other loans that you take out are usually secured against something tangible. So the bank gives you fantasy money in exchange for rights to your house or your land or your car or your boat or whatever. Okay, that's important to remember. They are always backed by something real, those loans, even though the loans themselves are complete fantasy. The banks also provide longer-term loans to borrowers and act as financial intermediaries for those funds. Less liquid forms of deposits, such as time deposits, are riskier classes of financial assets, such as equities or long-term bonds, may lock up a depositor's wealth for a period of time, making it unavailable for use on demand. Usually, that also entails a much higher interest rate you can get on that. So if you've got a term deposit, like maybe you're lucky you get $100,000, don't know what to do with it, put in a term deposit, instead of getting the going rate of 5%, you might be getting 15 or 20% on that after 4 years or 5 years up, for example. This borrowing short and lending long, or maturity transformation function of fractional reserve banking, is a role that many economists consider to be an important function of the commercial banking system. Make sense? Borrowing short, lending long? Yeah. Additionally, according to macroeconomic theory, which I don't really believe in, a well-regulated fractional reserve bank system also benefits the economy by providing regulators with powerful tools for influencing money supply and interest rates. Let me go back to the most important word, or 2 words in this sentence: well-regulated. Additionally, according to economic theory, a well-regulated fractional reserve bank system also benefits the economy by providing regulators with powerful tools for influencing the money supply and interest rates. I think we all would agree.
Here it comes.
That we live in a not well,
a poorly regulated.
Yeah, if in fact regulation applies at all.
At all, yeah.
In 2008, once again, this is for me, it's the linchpin. I mean, there's something in the 1980s, but the 2008 scenario is just unbelievable. In 2008, it became really clear, 100% clear, that there was no regulation. It just didn't exist.
Very thinly applied minimal restriction on banking practices.
Oh,
let's call it a restriction.
Let's call them suggestions.
Suggestions.
They're banking suggestions. And in fact, so bad was it that a lot of what went on didn't just border on the criminal and fraud, but was actual criminal and fraud. It actually was. And yet nobody went to jail. Okay, let's park that. We'll get to that. Many economists believe that these should be adjusted by the government to promote macroeconomic stability. And they're talking about money supply and interest rates. Yes, except, of course, hardly any government regulates them. It is the Federal Reserve that does it, which is an independent body. Independent body. Okay? In most countries, the central bank or the Federal Reserve, whatever it's called, is not part of the government system in most countries. Modern central banking allows banks to practice fractional reserve banking with interbank business transactions with a reduced risk of bankruptcy. The process of fractional reserve banking expands the money supply of the economy, but also increases the risk that a bank cannot meet its depositor withdrawals. Of course, think about it. In Australia, there no longer is a reserve requirement.
That's right.
Yeah, you don't believe me, that's fine, I don't care. You look it up yourself, do your own research. There no longer is.
Is it still in the show notes?
Oh, yeah.
Remember how we spoke about that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
What does it mean? Well, it's really simple, really, right? In the olden days, I give the bank $100, put it in my savings account. It's going to grow to millions in about 10,000 years.
Yeah.
But there's my $100, and the bank then, according to what was governed by law, could lend out $1,000 based on my $100.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The bank had to hold at least 10% of reserves,
That's
which
right.
seemed a reasonable amount. But again, in reality, of course, it is not, because that money doesn't exist. So off it went. But now in Australia, the banks don't have to hold anything. It's completely irrelevant. It's actually, it's irrelevant how much they have in deposits. They don't need deposits. They can just lend out whatever they feel like. Unsecured loans, though, meaning against bonds and houses, etc., etc. But nonetheless, this is money that doesn't exist, which of course leads to inflation. But nobody wants to talk about that, and they'll tell me I'm wrong. Well, explain to me how I'm wrong. Explain to me how I'm wrong about this. When you create money out of nothing, by creating credit, even if it's against a secured asset, and you're charging interest on that, which is also money that doesn't exist, right? So you got an asset that's arguably, let's say the asset is worth $1,000 today, for argument's sake, right?
Okay.
But I haven't got the money to get it, so I go to the bank. I need $1,000. Bank goes, okay, well, what are you going to buy? I'm going to buy this boat for $1,000, right? Okay, here's $1,000. How are you going to borrow? You're going to borrow it for 5 years or 10 years or however long you want to pay it back for. Okay, makes sense, right? Your interest rate is whatever it is, and in the end, you probably have to pay back,
Twice.
$1.5, $2, or $3,500 or whatever. But it's more. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that interest money doesn't exist, but the initial $1,000 also don't exist. This banking business, and I know people will argue against it because it completely destroys our understanding of where we are. Okay, our entire economic foundation is based and built on a lie that has been told so long and so loudly that we just don't even, no one has to tell it anymore. We just accept that this is the system. But bear in mind, this is a highly, I want to say, fraudulent and immoral and unethical way to run anything. And you can't control it either. Because only a few rogue players, which, hang on, Dave, that's what happened in 2008?
Mm-hmm.
What? We know what happened, and we know why it happened. And we also know that there is not enough money, physical money in the world today to cover all debt. Doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
This is a never-ending pyramid scheme. You can't stop it. If you stop the dance, if you stop the dance, the entire system is going to collapse. You can't stop it, and that's why they bailed out the banks in 2008, because you can't stop it. Now, I say I advocate for stopping it. There'll be hardship and turmoil and all kinds of bad that will come with it.
Dogs and cats living together.
In sin, yeah. But it's necessary because the system that we have is geared towards self-destruction and certainly the destruction of the individual and the continued expansion and also guaranteed thriving of the parasite class. Because if you stop the system, if any of the chairs fall over, if any of the cogs fall out of the machine, it all collapses. It will no longer, it'll be gone. And it will happen. Because we know that's how history works. It'll happen. It will happen. We will get to a point where the system is going to fall apart for whatever reason. There might be something small, but something's going to happen, and then we're going to start from scratch. But why don't you tell us about the money creation process, sir?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with there's two types of money in the fractional reserve banking system operating with a central bank. The central bank money created or adopted by the central bank regardless of its form. Precious metals, commodity certificates, banknotes, coins, electronic money loaned to commercial banks, or anything else in the central bank chooses as its form of money. Number two, commercial bank money. Demand deposits in the commercial banking system, sometimes referred to as checkbook money. That's it. When a deposit of central bank money is made at a commercial bank, the central bank money is removed from the circulation and added to the commercial bank's reserves. It is no longer counted as part of M1 money supply. Simultaneously, an equal amount of new commercial bank money is created in the form of bank deposits. When a loan is made by the commercial bank, which keeps only a fraction of the central bank money as reserve, and we'll talk about that later, using the central bank money from the commercial bank reserves, the M1 money supply expands by the size of the loan. This process is called deposit multiplication. This example shows how central bank money is used to create commercial bank money from an initial deposit of $100 of a central bank money. The initial deposit is lent out 10 times with a fractional reserve rate of 20% to ultimately create $500 of commercial bank money. It is important to note that the 20% reserve rate used here is for ease of illustration. Actual reserve requirements are actually usually a lot lower. For example, around 3% in the US and UK. In Australia, it's 0%. Each successive bank involved in this process creates a new commercial bank money on a diminishing portion of the original deposit of central bank money. This is because banks only lend out a portion of the central bank money deposited in order to fulfill reserve requirements and to ensure that they always have enough reserves on hand to meet normal transaction demands. The relending model begins with an initial $100 deposit of a central bank. Money is made into Bank A. Bank A takes 20% of it, or $20, and sets it aside as reserves, and then can theoretically loan out the remaining 80% or $80. Let's do these alternately.
Might be confusing.
If the bank...
Okay. Yeah, no, I know where I am, but okay, no, fine. So if the bank does in fact issue loan proceeds in the form of $80 in central bank money, the money supply actually totals $180, not 100, because the bank has loaned out 80 of the central bank money, kept 20 of central bank money in reserve, not part of the money supply, and substituted a newly created $100 IOU claim for the depositor that acts equivalently to and can be implicitly redeemed for central bank money. The depositor can transfer it to another account, write a check on it, or demand his cash back, etc., etc.
These claims by depositors on banks are termed demand deposits or commercial bank money, and are simply recorded in a bank's accounts as a liability, specifically an IOU to the depositor.
Now, from a depositor's perspective, commercial bank money is equivalent to central bank money. It's impossible to tell the two forms of money apart unless a bank run occurs.
At this point in the re-lending model, Bank A now only has $20 of the central bank money on its books.
The loan recipient is holding $80 in central bank money, but he soon spends the $80.
The receiver of that $80 then deposits it into Bank B. Bank B is now in the same situation as Bank A started with, except that it has a deposit of $80 of central bank money instead of $100.
Similar to Bank A, Bank B sets aside 20% of that $80 or $16 as reserves and lends out the remaining $64, increasing money supply by $64.
As the process continues, more commercial bank money is created.
And you can see here, it's a merry-go-round, right? It's a merry way of just creating money out of thin air. It's like, whoop.
Don't you love it?
Whoop.
Whoosh. There it is.
It's incredible. I mean, but it's a system, and it's a system that is, of course, completely in favor of the bankers. Not only that, but you know what the funny thing is? They charge us interest on this fantasy money.
That's right.
That's the kicker. This is like, it's bad enough to look. I could understand that if you've got tokens to use, in the economy because it makes it easier. Look, I get it. I mean, of course, it makes sense, right? But what happens to those tokens and how they're meted out, and then the banks have the audacity to charge me interest on a thing that doesn't actually exist,
and then fees.
That's what I find. That's the most galling thing. And then they rake in multi-billion-dollar profits.
Yeah.
Which I mean, you go what? And I don't know if you've dealt with bankers before. I have on fairly senior levels. This is my job. Not people I invite over to my house, I can tell you that. So, right up there. Now, the fractional reserve holding requirements. The reserve requirement, or cash reserve ratio, is a central bank regulation that sets the minimum amount of reserves that must be held by a commercial bank. The minimum reserve is generally determined by the central bank to be no less than a specified percentage of the amount of deposit liabilities the commercial bank owes to its customers. The commercial bank's reserves normally consist of cash owned by the bank and stored physically in the bank vault, plus the amount of the commercial bank's balance in that bank's account with the central bank. Dave?
The United States. In the United States, the reserve requirement, or liquidity ratio, as it's known, is a minimum value set by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System of the ratio of required reserves to a category of deposit liabilities. They make it sound so complicated. Called the net transaction accounts, or NTAs, owed by depository institutions to their customers, e.g. owned by commercial banks, including US branches of a foreign bank, savings and loan associations, savings bank, credit unions, etc. The deposit liability categories currently subject to reserve requirements are mainly checking accounts. There is no reserve requirement on savings accounts and time deposit accounts owned by individuals. The total amount of all the NTAs held by customers within US depository institutions, plus the US paper currency and coin held by the non-bank public, is called that's M1, isn't it? M1.
It is. Yep.
As of March 2020, the minimum reserve requirement for all deposit institutions was abolished, or more technically, fixed to 0% of eligible deposits. The board previously mandated a zero reserve requirement for banks with eligible deposits up to $16 million, 3% for bank up to $122.3 million, and 10% thereafter. The removal of reserve requirements followed the Federal Reserve's shift to an ample reserve system, in which the Federal Reserve banks pay member banks interest on reserves that they keep in excess of the required amount. It sounds like they're making money again somehow.
It's
marvelous. Cool. The International Banking Act of 1978 required branches of foreign banks operating in the United States to follow the same required reserve ratio standards. Mekhi.
The next one we should take in turn, and this is the percentage that each country we're going to share with you has to hold in reserve.
I hope you're sitting down and are prepared to be shocked.
As Dave said, Australia is 0%.
New Zealand, 0.
Sweden, 0.
The Eurozone, 1%.
The Czech Republic, 2%.
Hungary, 2.
South Africa, 2.5%.
Switzerland, the same, 2.5.
Latvia, 3%.
Poland, 0.5%.
Romania, 8%.
Wow, old school. Russia, 4%.
Chile, 4.5%.
Nice pronunciation. India, 3%.
Bangladesh, 6%.
Bangladesh means pot people. I hope you know that. Lithuania, 6%.
And Nigeria, which is a massive outlier, 27.5%.
It was raised from 22.5 in 2020. Oh. Pakistan, 5%.
Taiwan, 7%.
Turkey, or Turkey, 8.5%.
Jordan, 8%.
Zambia, 8%.
Burundi, 8.5%.
Ghana, 9%.
Iceland, 2%.
Israel is 6%.
Mexico, 10.5%.
Sri Lanka, 8%.
Bulgaria, 10%.
Croatia, 9%.
Costa Rica, 15%.
Malawi, is that the Malawi? Sorry, 15%.
Nepal, 6%.
Hong Kong, 0.
And finally, on the list that we have here, Brazil at 21%. You can see there's a fairly massive spread, but you know what the interesting thing here is?
What's that?
The developed economies, or what we would call the first world,
Yes.
have the lowest deposit requirements.
Totally.
The third world nations have the highest reserve requirements.
Now, Nigeria had, rampant interest. Sorry, the other one. What's it called?
Oh, yeah.
It was their
Inflation,
economy was going out of control with inflation.
Yes. So it's just it's crazy hyperinflation.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, if once it happens, it's
You have to change currencies to get out of it, usually.
Absolutely. In fact, currency reforms have happened many times throughout history in a number of countries. Not usually, but very often after a war.
Yeah.
As Turkey, in my lifetime, I want to say two or three currency reforms that I know about. Germany had one, which came after World War II.
Australia had one, but it was decimalised.
Correct. It went from pounds and shillings to dollars and cents, right? Yeah. Oh, in fact, Germany had two then, because Germany, of course, went then to the euro as well.
Oh, yes, of course.
In fact, a lot of European countries went to euro, and Great Britain decided not to do that. They stayed with the pound, and now they're out of the eurozone altogether.
That's right. That always meant they were never really going to commit to it.
Well, look, that's right. Those islanders, right? But it is interesting to see the spread of requirements. But what it means, of course, is that if everybody wanted their money, they couldn't have it. It's that simple, right?
Yeah.
And people make fun of people that keep their cash under the mattress or in little savings piggy or whatever. It's not a bad idea to have cash on hand. And I tell you why, because you never know what's going to happen. You just don't know, right? I mean, forget cash even. I mean, have other valuables, have tradable commodities, right? Better yet, be useful.
Yeah.
Do something that matters, right? That's good advice for anyone. But certainly, if something were to happen, I mean, just think about for a second here. We saw what happened recently in Australia. At least I was affected for some reason. I think a banking system, it might have been Westpac, Commonwealth, I can't remember. One banking system was down, and all the FPOS machines and all the supermarkets no longer worked. Right? So all your credit cards, all your debit cards, completely useless.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't let you have the goods on credit either.
No.
Right? It's not like, oh, yeah, it's Bob. Yeah, look at Bob. I'll just write down how much you have, and you just come back and pay me tomorrow, right? No. You can't pay. You're not getting nothing. Right?
It's not like a local shop not on the high street if you're in England, and during World War II, where everyone knew each other in their local communities, and you could just look, I am good for it, but I just don't have enough today. Can I still get that roast lamb, or that's the sausages, please? Yeah,
absolutely. And there was an honor system which worked. Now, so my advice is, I mean, as long as it's valuable still and usable, have cash. Have cash on you. I highly recommend having a couple $100 or whatever your currency is equivalents, right? So you can do at least one shop. Actually, more than a couple $100 now, I guess. So have enough money to do at least one grocery shop. Forget about your bills. Forget all that. That's electronically done, so you don't have to go and see anyone, right? If the system is down, it's down. It's down for everyone. Nothing you can do. But if you have to go out to buy food, right, for your family, make sure you have cash. Make sure you have cash. And Dave, that's, I think, in my opinion, going to be the main reason why a cashless society just won't work. Because you can't guarantee, especially these days. Now, I'm in IT, Dave's in IT, and the biggest thing in everyone's mind is cybersecurity.
That's right.
Doesn't exist. No such thing.
No
such thing. There's a whole bunch of things we're trying to do, but ultimately,
there's always going to be a way around it, a way through it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, exfiltration, as it's known, of your data, and then someone can pretend to be you anyway.
Yeah, 100%.
Now with AI, they can pretend to have your voice even if they had a voice print.
It is actually quite scary.
Yeah.
Now there are security systems out there that are predictive, proactive. That all exists, but ultimately, from at least my experience and what I've seen in the industry, the criminal element is a couple of steps ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very clever. They're different things, I mean, there's a lot of social engineering that goes into it as well. So there's a lot to be very wary. And every year, every country loses billions of dollars
Totally.
to those criminals, right? So that's important. So but it doesn't exist. So therefore, I think that bank failures, and I'm not talking about like a bank just going bankrupt, but I mean the electronic systems. System failures will become more common. Data breaches will become more common, and systems will be down more frequently, not less frequently, in my opinion. And it is a good idea to have, well, we always talk about reserves at home, but have cash on you. And even better, if you can do it, have several currencies in your wallet.
Oh, wow.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know, right? I mean, funnily enough, because I travel so much for work, in my travel wallet, that just happened.
That's right.
It just happened. So I accumulated a whole bunch of currency from all over the world in fairly decent amounts too, because if you're in a hotel you don't spend that much, but you always change some money. Then I just kept it in my wallet, right? So of course not everybody is in that position, but do carry the cash, just because you don't want to stand there at the till, right? And the machine is down. You've done all the shopping. You just spent an hour in the supermarket. You load up your trolley. You can't get it now. That sounds
awesome. Right. So,
but
like we've said, there isn't a way to get the money out. There isn't a little credit card machine. They don't have those anymore. I remember last time there was a problem. They actually said, "Get the machine from out the back. It's out the back," and then people didn't know how to use it, and they couldn't find the paper that goes in.
Yes, I mean, I used it a lot because I was in retail in my youth, right?
Yeah.
And, it was satisfying. It was a satisfying click clack.
Because you knew money was getting made right there, right? That's it.
Yeah, it was something, right? Anyway, but look, I think we can finish the regulation today, Dave. If you want to go ahead and tell us about the regulation, that should conclude today nicely, and we can talk about the history of money next week.
Because the nature of fractional reserve banking involves the possibility of bank runs, central banks have been created throughout the world, through every modern war, to address these problems. And that's the installation of the central banks. Central banks controls the bank regulations related to fractional reserve banking have generally been used to impose restrictive requirements on note issue and deposit taking on the one hand, and to provide relief from bankruptcy and creditor claims and or protect creditors with government funds when banks defaulted on the other hand. Such measures have included 1. Minimum required reserve ratios. As we've seen, most of those have been in the established world have been put to 0. Number 2, minimum capital ratios. Number 3, government bond deposit requirements for note issue. Number 4, 100% marginal reserve requirements for note issues such as Bank Charter Act of 1844 in the UK. Number 5, sanction on bank defaults and protection from creditors for many months or even years. And number 6, central bank support for distressed banks and government guarantee funds for notes and deposits, both to counteract bank runs and to protect bank creditors.
No one is.
Go on.
Hang on. So this is the only part, the last bit, really, that protects the depositors.
That's right.
Yeah.
Everything else protects the banks.
There you go.
Yeah. Reserve requirements. So the currently prevailing view of reserve requirements is that they are intended to prevent banks from, 2 points here, number 1, generating too much money by making too many loans against the narrow money deposit base. Oh yeah, like that. I think that's penciled in, and it's in 1-point font.
That ship has sailed, my friend.
That's right. Number 2, having a shortage of cash when large deposits are withdrawn. Although the Reserve Bank is thought to be a legal minimum, it is understood that in a crisis or bank run, reserves may be made available on a temporary basis. In practice, some central banks don't require reserves to be held. In some places that do require reserves to be held, such as the United States and the European Union, the reserves are not required to be held during the day. Reserve requirements are intended to ensure that the banks have sufficient supplies of highly liquid assets so that the system operates in an orderly fashion and maintains public confidence. The last one's the only thing that is of real value in that sentence.
You're 100% correct. The operations in an orderly fashion and the maintaining public confidence, they go hand in hand. So if you've got an interruption to the orderly functioning of it, then people lose confidence, right? And if the public loses confidence, like I said, it's all over.
It's gone.
Because there's nothing backing up these currencies. There's nothing backing up the system. There's no reality to any of it. Mm-hmm. It's not real. And that's the one thing that people have the hardest time with, Dave. People have the hardest time understanding just how fantastical the entire system is. It truly is. It's made up.
It's like a Disney film. It's all make-believe.
Yeah, that's right. It's like the Immaculate Conception of Mary. It's like, no, she was never with a man. Really? Yeah, it's fantastical. Yeah, this is the Immaculate Conception of money. It never came from anywhere. No, I made it. I was just poof, poof into existence.
Look at that. There's a pile of money.
And I'm using religious examples advisedly because, like I said, this is a faith-based monetary system.
Yeah, totally.
Richard Dawkins. Go, no, this is not what? No, this is not. This is wrong. We should not believe in any of this. And he would be right. It's a fantasy. And I, look again. I get a lot of people upset when I talk about it, so I don't anymore. Not really. Even close friends get really upset when I talk about the illusion of money. I don't know, what do you mean illusion? Because everybody's worked hard to get to a certain place in life, right?
That's right.
And I'm here kicking over the apple cart. I've worked hard my life. I like the stuff that I have. I don't want to give it up.
No,
but
likewise.
I understand. Yeah, exactly. But Dave and I, we understand how the system works. You got to understand how. Because how are you going to? What are your strategies when it all collapses?
Strategy?
Most people will just go, what? What do you mean? Copper piping? What? I mean, it's lead piping. Rather.
The lead piping in the Roman era, yeah.
Hey, what do you mean lead piping? What? It's terrible, everybody, because it's quicksand. It's not even. No, that's not true. There's a certain stability in quicksand. There's
portions of it that don't exist at all. That's it. Yeah.
That's right. This is thin ice, and there's a heat wave coming. This is what this is. And I know you don't want to hear it. I get it. I dig it. Okay, whatever. Sure. But
it is the game we're playing. It is honestly the game we are playing. If you've played Monopoly, you've really understood what's going on. Yeah. Right? Friend of the banker can get slipped a couple of notes here and there, right? It's all good. Yeah. The person who makes the most money completely wipes out and owns everybody else on the board.
Yeah.
If that wasn't the greatest life lesson as a child, I don't know what was.
Oh, look, I think, absolutely. It's just nuts.
And I wasn't told that was how the whole world ran. I thought it was just a game. Yeah. You were wrong. Nicky, before you, when you said how old I was, which is really funny because really I'm only 6 years older than you, I think. Right. I couldn't help thinking because of the age that you portrayed me as. I had to say this joke because I put it in our text between us two, and that's that new Oldsmobile I was interested in. I felt like Mr. Burns for a minute. I was so old. 28. That's hilarious. Back in the 70s. Yeah.
Cantankerous old man shaking fist at the heavens.
That's right.
What?
We've run, little boy. Yeah, that's funny.
And now with the voice stylings of Mr. Burns. New and improved. But this is probably the most important shows that we, or among the most important shows that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's real. This is real stuff. I mean, the other stuff is real as well, but it is a bit more removed, I guess. This is immediately affecting everyone's life.
Well, that's the point. The other shows that we do, all of them, you can take it or leave it. This is the one that is we're in.
That's where we are.
Oh, you can't. Can you time it better? This has been another Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mackie. Do like, share, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Otherwise, stay tuned for Jeb and his awesome show coming up next, After Hours. We're going to catch you at 7 a.m. Tuesday and Thursday morning, Kentucky time, for Plato's Cave. And in the meantime, be safe.